Claire Cousins established a Melbourne practice, Claire Cousins Architects, in 2005, and has since forged practice recognised for design excellence in residential, cultural, interior and furniture design. Engaged in projects large and small, the studio explores experientially rich architecture that celebrates simple domestic ritual whilst curating newfound relationships with the surrounding context and landscape. Since 2007, Claire Cousins Architects has received numerous architecture, interior and colour awards. Claire is actively involved in the broader design community as a mentor, public speaker, board member and industry representative. Claire is also an inaugural investor in Nightingale, supporting the landmark triple bottom line housing development model for its social and sustainable benefits. Next month, Claire will launch her own Nightingale project. Tonight, Claire will give us an insight into how she works and some of the results of that work. Please welcome Claire Cousins.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. I have a cold and husky voice, so I'm about 1 octave lower than I normally am, so you have to excuse the huskiness tonight. I thought I would focus more on 2 projects and maybe give you a little bit of background behind our practice. To start with, and then just finish off with some projects that are on the drawing board at the moment. As Stephen said, I started the practice in 2005 after working for a number of Melbourne architecture practices. And we're now a practice of 9. We're quite a young group. I have a practice manager, 2 associates, 3 graduates and 2 students. It's a very collaborative office. Sorry. We're lucky enough to be in a great roomless building in Melbourne that my husband has a commercial construction company and he and his partners bought this building. It was totally covered in render, black tinted glass. Even I couldn't quite see the merit of it when they first bought it. And we painstakingly pulled out of beds lovely Italian 60-year-old labourers on a cherry picker for 8 weeks, and he chipped off all the render and then revealed it back to the old form concrete. So it's been a labour of love. We take the Ben and my office are in the top floor, and we have tenants down on the ground floor. And these are some of the interior spaces. So it's quite nice actually. I suppose being exposed to a lot of architects, have architects as friends, and I've always had a lot of builders and trades as friends. I think it's always, I've been hit over the head a lot by the practicality stick and that architects are not practical. And so I think having been with him since I was 18, I would classify myself as a very practical architect. But we do love having arguments about he thinks he's a good architect and I think I'm a good builder. I thought I would just, for those who don't know any of our work, show some of the, given that I was only going to run through 2 projects tonight, show some of our work that we've done over the years. Primarily we do a lot of housing. We didn't start the practice with a commission. I left after working at Woodmarsh on a very steep learning curve, and really just threw my hand at whatever jobs came my way. So originally it was people saying, oh, can you do a kitchen for me, or I need some curtains, and I sort of got labelled a bit with the interiors gig, which I didn't mind because I always really loved, I suppose, thinking about spaces from the inside out. And slowly but surely we started getting renovation projects, and now we're finally getting, after 11 years of practice, offers to do bigger projects and bigger houses. But I love the renovations. I think the thing that, to me, is that, and David really touched on a lot of that tonight with his presentation and his projects that he discussed, is that stitching between old and new, and that's something that I really enjoy. And we've really only started just getting into some new houses, which is a totally different mindset working on new projects. Sorry, it's jumping. There you go. I won't go through them. There's a whole of our interiors. When we started, also, some of our early breaks were actually doing a lot of retail design. One of the big mistakes and my only sort of regret was I never thought I could afford a photographer when I first started, so we really didn't ever photograph properly some of our early work. We worked on about 20 local and international projects for ESOP, and by getting into retail, retail was a really great way. It was almost became a great opportunity, almost designer skis, to test ideas quickly. It was great for cash flow. Interior projects pay a lot better than architectural projects, and it meant that you could test ideas and move on to the next thing. With some of the cultural projects that we've done, that was, I suppose, in my mind, every architect's dream is really to get into some public work. It's very hard, I'm sure nationally, but particularly Victoria, to get any public work. If you want to do a kindergarten, you need to prove what other kindergartens you've done or what museums you've done, and when you haven't done any, you can't get any. So I suppose, in a way, retail in the early years was a really great way for me to be able to have people inhabit or experience spaces that we've designed, because houses are very hard to get access to. And so that also then led to projects, exhibition design with at ACCA. We've been doing on our third project at the Melbourne Arts Centre, designing educational spaces. We've done some restaurants. And so I often say that it's because they're public, they're not actually public projects, but they feel like public projects, and they're a way of, I suppose, building up the CV and being able to do more of those sort of jobs. This was just a slide too that we've actually started doing some collaborations with furniture designers and designed a coffee table. Okay, the two projects I'm going to take you through were in the awards this year and were shortlisted. Sadly, didn't pick up a gold, it's very competitive. But that's okay, I still think they're good projects. But I thought what they were interesting to talk about was they were both built concurrently at the same time in very neighbouring suburbs by the same builder. They're two very different clients. One delightful client, one very difficult client. They're both very different projects, and I think in a way they're quite a good representation of how, for us, we really find the client's brief and us trying to extract information out of what the client wants. They often don't have a clue what they want, other than the practical requirements. For us, it's trying to find those nuances as to finding clues in how they talk about how they live and what excites them and what they don't like. And for us, it's about trying to extract that and almost curate a space and an environment for them to live. And I thought that these actually highlight that very clearly. So the first house, called Gable House, due to its roof form, is located in North Fitzroy. So it's in an urban area of Melbourne, very densely populated, typically by single-fronted period houses. It's on a very unusual sort of shaped site. North is up the page, and bound by a lot of parks and gardens and bike paths. The clients came to us. We often meet clients for the first time on site. They had actually renovated with an architect before a very small cottage nearby, had two young children, and they were so excited. And walking through this house, normally we've seen a lot of unrenovated houses, it was like a cracked den. And they were, isn't it fantastic? Look what we can do with this place. And I'm like, worried that I'm going to fall through the floorboards. So it was a real sort of rabbit warren, little narrow street at the front, laneway at the rear. Already the site has sort of lent itself to opening up pulling the house back from this sort of side northern facing garden. Here's just some of the original spaces. And the brief from the client was garden vistas, dedicated bike areas, celebration of old and new. The client loved blue, and she wanted the kitchen not to be a kitchen, but or not to look like a kitchen. So our strategy really was focusing on this north-facing garden, but really looking at other kinds of sort of the service garden and also a front a front garden, and then how all these spaces would connect with one another and creating vistas through space, obviously to outdoor space. So So we retained quite very little of the house at the front, which was really the only period parts. And then really wanted to, given the very wide frontage of the house, we really wanted the addition to sit very sympathetically behind the old. So the addition that we put in here, you can see this sort of gable form, which wraps up, creates a sort of an attic accommodation upstairs, and then lined up with this eave here, so that as you approach down the street, it really tucked in behind and wasn't very visible. The volume at the back was really about this volume was really about responding to the landscape at the rear. So it became these three parts. This is a view, it's random that you don't really experience much in the house, so it explains the sort of different volumes. So that, like I said, the materiality, the mid part of the house was really a metal cladding to sort of reference the timber weatherboard, and the rear was responding to the rear landscape. So original brick fireplaces were stripped and expressed. And these upper story spaces, which provide the master bedroom. The children's bedrooms at the rear, given that we were able to sort of accommodate all these areas of outdoor space, it gave us the ability to have large open areas from the children's bedrooms to really encourage that use and access to the outdoors. And their private deck upstairs. They're very open about this idea of sort of connection and engagement with the street. So this view on the left is actually from their bedroom. The stair comes up into this space, and then actually the walkie road looks out to the street, and they insisted on no blinds or curtains, which is fine. They're very happy. Wave to the neighbours as they're getting dressed. For us, we really looked at this sort of almost like a pinwheel plan around this island bench, which is in the pale blue. And so it was, when you come into the house through here, one of the original rooms was used as a sitting room, and you really sort of are pulled straight into the sort of living quarters of the house. The kitchen here is the sort of working hub. Under the stair is tucked a study, which I'll show you some images. And then we use this as a dark navy blue sort of service pod that contains books. Okay, going up to that, sorry, I don't know why. Oh no, thank you. There we go. So that's the kitchen, and then around the back the pantry space with again views through the kitchen, through the street, and taking this sort of colour through. The very sad thing about this project was Kate, the mother, was my age, and just before our first client meeting to present the original scheme, I was diagnosed with cancer, and put the meeting on hold, and then said, oh, it's all fine, we'll keep going, and it sat in planning for a long time. And then during the planning process, she called me, and without giving me the long story, sort of said, we've got two options, let's just get into documentation. I know we don't have planning permission. And then sadly died just before we started construction. So it became this, they were the most delightful clients in that everything we put to them, there was, such an enormous amount of trust, and I think trust is a huge thing that we talk about and try and sort of talk to clients about, in that we understand the sort of nervousness, particularly with domestic clients, that they often haven't done this before. It's a huge amount of money, but trust, it's always the projects where there's been an amazing amount of respect and trust both ways that we find the projects run smoothly as they do. And her last sort of wish from me was to make sure that Julian had no say in the furniture, because he was not allowed to put football posters all over the house, and then I had to check on him regularly. So it was heartbreaking, and her kids the same age as mine. Anyway, keep flicking through. The garden vistas was really, I suppose, the site really lent itself to this ability to break up the garden. So there's a rear access from the rear lane for bikes, and we created a dedicated bike storage. And then really this, and it's something that we do in a lot of our work, that really, I suppose, a bit like open plan living, that it's not what it's cracked up to be. And we tell clients that it's much better to have sort of spaces where you can retreat and move, from one to another. Similarly with garden, I think having one big tract of landscape at the back is sort of, it tends to be sort of underwhelming, and it's, the last thing you want to do is sort of see everything at once. And for us, it's really about spaces revealing themselves as you move through an interior or exterior. And so the positioning and the siting of the house really enabled us to have these, we created in the end a contemplative garden in the front, and somewhere for the kids, and Julian sort of, they planted a tree for Kate, the service yard, the vegetable garden, and basically this, the ability to constantly be connecting with the landscape from inside. There was also this idea between, I suppose, these internal vistas as well, the ensuite pod, which is up the top, having these little sort of views so that they can knock on the window and tell the kids to hurry when they're ready for school or they're in the shower. Just again, I suppose, these domestic rituals of the practicality of having spaces that can be seen and not seen. And then just showing you some before and afters. And sustainability was really big, a big part. The only thing that the children really ever wanted to talk about was where was their chicken coop going. So there's them in the chicken coop. There's a very established vegetable garden. Fiona Rockoff is a well-known Victorian, lovely, very talented landscape designer, did the garden. Kate's also dying wish was that she wanted the house to be powered by geothermal, which we've never done before. It's not typically done in sort of metropolitan Melbourne. And also all the bricks from the demolished structure were actually reused at the rear addition. And I suppose all we really ever strive for is the sort of to create a really livable space for our clients. The antithesis to this is Rail House. It's in Northcote, so they're walking distance from one another. The clients came to us and lived in a little cottage in Collingwood. They've got two slightly older children, and showed us a lot of reference images of quite austere sort of Japanese architecture, a lot of concrete, black stained timber. The wife in particular said that she said this pet hated being in these small cottage spaces where she could hear her neighbours sort of cackling through walls, and this sort of amphitheatre effect that happens in close proximity where people stay up late, sort of the noise reverberates off walls. And they were quite near the East-West Link proposed tunnel, so the sound of, I suppose, infrastructure and roads didn't really bother them, but really feeling like they needed more space. They came to us, there are some other reference images that they gave us. They came to us, and I met them on site for the first time, and they said that there was a plot of land on the market from Big Track, and Big Track had acquired the site, knocked down the house as a track widening program, and then the site had sat vacant for quite a long time. And apparently through council, quite a lot of people had applied for multi-res developments. It's about 550 square metre land, so it's quite good sized land, but a very challenging shape. North is up the page. And we've got a very long 50 metre frontage onto train tracks. Also, which is not visible in when this Google Earth shot was taken, but that's a big sort of rail pedestrian crossing here with very loud, high-pitched or high-frequency ding, 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 ding. So, and the client said to me, we can get this land really cheap. Do you think you can do, a great little house that just like and the things that were really important to them were security and the sense of sanctuary and privacy, and they're very reclusive people. And of course they had hardly any money to spend. And so the question they posed, I suppose we tried to solve in the office was, would it be possible to produce a habitable, comfortable home in such close proximity to trains and a level crossing? So we got an acoustic consultant on board, which we don't really need to do. And I suppose we really, his advice was, we were dealing with low frequency and high frequency from the train and the bells. It had to be essentially a sound wall, one that basically just an absorption mechanism. So we looked at other absorption, freeway walls. And he gave us some specifications of it just needs to be this thick, double skin core field. And we already had we already had designed a basic principal house, so we had something to respond to, and we sort of had solved most of the problems. And we really just felt that we needed him to scientifically test it, and also I wanted the client to hear from him how much noise they were going to hear. I wasn't going to tell her that she'd never hear another train again. So our approach really was to create this singular sound wall, essentially. It's a very high wall, sort of 5 metres at one point towards the front of the site. The land slopes up, the site slopes up at the back. And sloping this sort of singular roof plane, given that we had very low budget, we typically quote to clients that we build for about 4,000 square metre plus GST, and we had to try and build this, and we did, for 2,700 a square metre, which is cheap, and so it's very stripped back. So the idea was that it was almost a sort of shed-like volume, and sloping the roof away from the sound to allow sort of noise to travel over the top. We inserted a light cord to allow us try and insert natural light ventilation into rooms. And so, like I said earlier, security was a really big key importance. So this diagram shows I suppose red being the most sort of the buffering elements. Ironically, north being up here, this face north. So we really pushed circulation to the outside, non-essential spaces, all bedroom windows faced east in the opposite direction. And we tried to insert second living spaces here, which would actually have some northern orientation. But essentially the street, there was only one point of crossover, an ability to locate a crossover, and there was no way I wanted the garage to be the frontage of the house. So we had the cars can sort of drive up and here, so the garage door is not the sort of facade, and that this becomes this very mute, windowless facade. Interestingly, we spoke to, it was in a heritage control area. There's quite a lot of very diverse heritage buildings in the street, and so we had to go through the heritage assessment. Surprisingly, the heritage architect for the municipality was very supportive of its muteness because it wouldn't overwhelm the period houses on the right. There's a double-storey terrace, which I was surprised about and pleasantly surprised. Our approach really was that when we're not putting any windows in the facade, how do we try and activate? We're always really keen for our houses to have some response to the street, and this house was clearly turning its back on the street. And that really led to this idea of this blockwork screen, where we really just used the humble, in this project we didn't even have the budget to use designer block with the oxide in it. It's literally just a basic concrete block, and that had its challenges. But by turning that on its edge, it created this secure sort of circulation space where the household can park here. There's a door, this is open air with a covered roof. They can come in and then come in through the front door here. And when the light's on, as you can see in the photograph, you then get this sort of sense of occupation and habitation without the, I suppose, security breach. You can't really see it, but there's a very sturdy steel grate door here, and the front door behind that has a triple barrel lock into the roof, and it's full on. So then the 3 bedrooms, as I talked about, that we only had enough in the budget to have. We've got acoustically treated glass in those rooms, and there was some compromise in sort of where the bedrooms really ended up, because they had the sort of most respite. They tend to be the darker rooms in the house, which the clients were fine with. The first bedroom has an attic space on top of here, which provides sort of more acoustic buffer. These living spaces, there was a tiny little study nook here. The husband works from home on Friday, looking onto this sort of contemplative little garden, and has a great sort of aspect to sort of survey and look over the street. This second lounge, which we also put in these large sliding doors to convince the clients they didn't need a dedicated guest bedroom, so they can close them off when a guest comes if they need it. And then this, which the client calls snug, which is a very small little room with full height bookshelf. This little room down here, where she can look at her recipe books and out to the vegetable garden. So the house is a very modest, simple house, primarily stained cedar and the blockwork. The house is sort of austerely furnished as well at the moment because they've spent every last penny they've got and have no money for furniture. But we did put there's an art, like a little concealed track for them to be able to spend their art in time to come. For us, in all projects, we really try and convince clients of spatial efficiency and flexibility. And in this project, it was constantly a battle with the client where they said the house is too small, it's not big enough. And we agreed that for the budget they had, we would not exceed 200 square metres. And the client kept making it bigger and bigger, and of course it ended up 240 square metres. And it wasn't until she moved in that she's like, "This is huge." And I said, that's right. So it was things like trying to incorporate little sort of study doors here, using corridor space to have other functions, and this sliding door like I spoke about before. Budget, which I've touched on, we really we knew that the wall interfacing with the train would be bombed in no time, graffiti bombed, which it was actually. In the end, they ended up commissioning an art piece, which then got bombed. So we didn't spend any money, and given that laying the sort of half-height blocks cost more than the full height, it was really just sort of about keeping them for the front facade and for the fireplace. Graffiti was a major concern, given that we were leaving everything raw, so we insisted the builder. We had to sort of do a list of graffiti protection during construction. And the other big concern we had, drama, was that we insisted that the builder ordered all the blocks, which was quite a lot of material, in one batch to try and mitigate colour batch variation, which of course he didn't do. And so then we ended up with this colour. And so I had to sort of say, let's just pretend we've got a zipper running up and down this 40-metre long wall with two batch colours. So yeah, this really does, it just shows the stepping levels, the height differences. To top things off, the client obtained a geotech, a soil report, before buying the property. I think they thought that would talk about contamination, which it doesn't, as we know. And then gave us the geotech report to use, which we did. And then it was a very good class of soil, which was terrific. We thought, oh, maybe that's happened because it's been empty, vacantness, and the soil stabilised. However, when the builder started, it was sheer rock. It was $70,000 of rock removal. It was outrageous, and we actually so went from a class M to a class P. I think it was worse than a P actually. But it was that when we ran the geotech, and they said, "Oh, we outsourced it to so and so," and we called so and so, and they're like, "Oh," and they actually forged the soil report. They had not done the soil report. Someone had forged it. So all we could keep saying was, thank God it was not our soil report, it was the client's soil report. But when you've got a very emotional, uptight client who thinks the builder's trying to take them at every turn, and then this happens at the beginning, it really made for a very difficult project. As I said, graffiti, and then during the project, and then even just access, having to build some of the walls while having workers working very close to the train lines. There's the train. But in the end, as austere and modest as the project is, I took a journalist came through on earlier this week to write an article about it, and the client, as nutty as she was and hard, and that's actually the closest we've come to resigning from a project, but we actually stayed in the project for the sake of the builder. She almost bursts into tears every time to say how she can't believe that we, I suppose, manifested all the things that they hoped that they could have, and which is, I suppose, I was saying to someone today, Penny today, that I actually realise it's a little bit like childbirth, like you do these projects, and you think, never again, I'm not going through that pain, like it, and then you more endorphins, you get pat on the back, client cries, and you're like, oh, do that again, So I just, anyway, it was torturous, but it actually, when the clients would raise and they, can't be happier, you're sort of like, oh, finally, that's great, and at least there's spreading good word about you and not bad word. for the Architecture Awards earlier this year, the client found the children are now in early high school, and they found this reference image from one of their trips to Japan and sent it to me, which we'd never seen it before, and they couldn't believe the likeness to their front space at the front, which I thought was weird. This is like a 10-year-old photo. So they thought that was even more fantastic. So I thought I'd just finish off just showing, I suppose, a couple of projects that are on our books now. Like I said earlier, we've been in business for 9 or 11 years, and I think every couple of years, or probably happened the first 3, and then I think when we turned 10, you have these sort of realisations every now and then. You wonder maybe why you're about to collapse with exhaustion, and then you realise that you've actually got 35 to 40 projects and way too many, and then you realise that they're not big enough and we need to halve the number and double the size. And so we've shut our books for 12 months, and the exciting thing is that you then, when you start getting people coming to you with $2.5 million budgets, not $600,000 budgets. And so we've got this tricky project in Morris, which is Bayside, Melbourne. Really lovely client. It's a brick project, but it's one where we've got very tight restraints on the building form. We're basically working within an envelope that we can't exceed. And so it's I suppose, a project where we're sort of playing with this idea of erosion and carving of a sort of singular form, and having a build-on pool and all those kinds of things. This is a commercial project that in Collingwood for a builder that we've worked for a long time. And we've built some of our projects, and we've done a warehouse in before. And it's landlocked by on 3 sides. And so the idea really is that it's a 4-storey commercial building, but he really wanted us to design it so that it could convert into apartments in 10 years' time. If given where it is, it's highly likely. So the idea for us is it faces west, but it's very much sheltered by the neighbouring properties. The outlook is terrible. We're trying to maximise the amount of sort of light. There's a big courtyard at the back. So we're really sort of playing with this idea of trying to have an open staircase, green staircase, to really encourage the use of stairs and sort of openness. And the facade is basically we're bringing back the glass block. It's going to be great. So excited. So this idea of balancing privacy but luminosity into the building, and so it's all glass bricks with various sort of cutouts. Well, these are just some of them. Vale Street is a very small footprint, 140 square metre site that my husband and his partners bought. It's 200 metres from our building in North Melbourne, and it actually came with an existing 8-storey apartment building, planning permit with no car parks. It's very sort of city fringe. The existing design is by a sort of very commercial architect and was less than satisfactory. So I talked my way into getting the gig, and so it's quite exciting to be working on I'm just going to show you the plans going backwards. It's a small footprint. It's basically a very sort of central core, lift core stair, and then 2 single bedroom apartments the whole way out. We're able to sort of introduce light wells so that all rooms have cross ventilation and natural ventilation. We don't have SEP 65 in Victoria or any decent housing regulations, which we're working on. As you go up through the building, it becomes a couple of double-storey 2-bedroom apartments. So we're super excited to be working at a different scale. And then, as Stephen said in the intro, I'm not sure that everyone knows anything about Nightingale, but Jeremy from Burry Architects is this very driven, idealistic, go-getter, trailblazer, we call him. Yeah. And after building the Commons, which won a landmark amount of awards a couple of years ago, I think 20 in Australia alone, has sort of started this craze. He's building Nightingale, and when he bought the land across the road from the Commons a year or so ago, he started contacting sort of colleagues to invest. And the real principle behind it is taking work, I hope there's no developers here tonight, or taking the work more away from the developers. And really, it's almost sort of micro investing. So it might be that there's 25 investors with $100,000 investment each, So most of us, I think we sort of, took 100,000 off our mortgage and put it in. It really streamlines, non-sort of sustainability principles, zero car parking, no air conditioning or passively cooled. I've written some things up there. But it's really about creating these sort of vertical, I suppose, community and really providing a really viable alternative to the dross that's being constructed in Melbourne at the moment. And I suppose, and returns for us as developers is capped at 15%, which, if we've taken it out of our home loan at 4.5%, 15% per annum, not guaranteed, but that's if it's returned within 3 years, which is, even with the big VCAP hearings that they've had, and the knockbacks, is still looking viable. So 6 Degrees then launched the second one, Andrew Maynard the third, and then Jeremy's been hassling me for 9 months and I'm just about to launch the fourth. I'm not raising it for any reason for investment. We've got enough people coming, which is good, but I just thought it was a good opportunity to sort of talk about that. That's sort of, I suppose that's something that we're excited about, and it's nice when you can sort of take a step back and say, well, why are the reasons, why do we want to do it, what's important, what can we do as architects, and I suppose legacy. Jeremy's very much leaving a legacy of what his work has been about, and I think sometimes it's nice to sort of put your head up, because it's very easy to get very consumed by client deadlines and everything else, and it's a sort of exciting movement of what's happening, and Jeremy's very keen. I think there's some interest in talking about it in Adelaide and Perth and hopefully Sydney, and Jeremy said to me the other day he's hoping to have 1,000 active projects, Nightingale projects, by 2020, which I find astounding. I told you, idealistic, but anyway, so watch this space. Thank you.
David Boyle graduated from the University of Newcastle in 1993. I've known David since that time, because I used to teach there, and briefly taught him in 92 and 93. What I remember is that David was a very keen fan of the work of Peter Wilson. While I might see the seeds of that influence in the work, like all good architects, I believe David now has his own voice, and his work has its own signature, which is growing and maturing with each project. After gaining experience in a series of Australian practices, David established his architecture studio in 2002, specialising in the design of individual houses in Sydney, the Central Coast and rural New South Wales. Since 2005, David Boyle Architect has received a steady stream of awards for its unique and richly detailed designs, which joyously combine the pragmatics of construction with the poetics of architecture. In fact, David currently has 3 projects shortlisted for the 2016 New South Wales Institute of Architects Awards to be announced tomorrow night. So David's on a plane tomorrow morning. Tonight, David will present a selection of residential projects with a focus on placemaking and connection to their setting. Please welcome David Boyle.
Wonderful to be here in Adelaide, and thank you, Stephen, for your introduction, and great to be part of this Double Talk Speaker series. I've got 400 and something slides, so I need to go through at a very fast pace, so you'll have to just bear with me on all of that. But firstly, a little bit about our practice. We're a small design studio working principally on single and multiple housing projects. Our office is at Burry Beach on the Central Coast, which is about 2 hours north of Sydney. It's fluctuated between 2 and 3 people over the last 14 years, and we've deliberately kept this small so we can maintain a direct relationship to our clients and maintain the quality of the work that we produce. The majority of our work is in Sydney, and we also work locally on the coast. So the context is often dramatically quite different, from narrow urban sites to sloping bushland blocks. I wanted to show several completed houses today in different settings and typologies, and talk about these with specific reference to our approach to context and placemaking. So, place as a physical site and its immediate context, and place as an emotive placemaking for residential occupation. In an urban setting, this might mean looking at existing building fabric, scale, the streetscape, rhythm, form, detail and materials. In a landscape setting, this may mean a study of the natural environment, the topography, the trees, the rocks, patterns, texture, light and colour. And we use this study to establish a series of pragmatic and emotional responses to find the underlying opportunities within each site and to attempt to establish a direct relationship between the site and the building, so if you like, they're stitched together. Each project is underpinned by passive sustainable design principles, use of economical, low maintenance or recycled materials, and retention of building fabric where possible. Our process is delivered through constant testing of poetic and pragmatic ideas, through hand and computer drawings, updated throughout the design and construction process. Our work is often sculpturally informed with an expansion and contraction of scale. We've found this allows flexibility for a variety of occupation modes, from large gatherings to spaces for the family or for one. Our buildings are often poetic in nature, layered in detail, pattern, colour and materials, and interpret traditional building elements in contemporary ways. They are highly personal, based on a strong relationship with our clients, with unique, joyous features, and often incorporate site-specific artwork, craftsmanship and the handmade. The first project is an old one. It's the Burry residence on the Central Coast, which was completed in 2009. It's set within Boyle National Park, and our approach was to look at that surrounding landscape and apply it as a narrative laid into the design, so the house sits quietly and respectfully within its place. The site's on the southern end of the Central Coast, just around the corner from our office. The National Park is full of classic Australian coastal landscape, spectacular rock outcrops. It's layered and textured with these twisting Angofra branches, which often create a graft themselves to the surrounding landscape, contrasting against very delicate seasonal elements. This is our existing building. The new work has been carefully grafted to the existing building. Its form has been twisted, stepped and stretched to the edges of the site to capture and frame the aspect and the views. New spaces are interconnected with subtle shifts in geometry and axis to create a transparency and fluidity to the plan. A new bedroom wing projects over the existing car parking slab and sits under the canopy of the tree. The building references several landscape-inspired themes inspired by its place. The building as a whole could be seen as a projecting rock outcrop. This reference is established at a macro and also a micro level. A projecting bay window creating an artificial cave, the rounded building form, the ensuite vanity, the concrete entry platform with its eroded form, the toothed brickwork and cave-like entry veranda, a fireplace outcrop at the end of the living room, and the kitchen island. The bedroom wing is supported by a twisted steel structure and holds a place for light at night. Twin posts with the surrounding building elements seemingly forced to bend around them in an organic way. Subtle changes in direction are softened and layered. The building is both pinned to the earth and projecting over the landscape, yielding an implied lightness and heaviness. There are subtle shifts in the scale of the building fabric that imply a greater depth of field and link the building to the landscape. Painting adds another layer, here inspired by the spotted gums, which is used to highlight elements of the building or signal the locations of the entry of light. The recycled timber floor has been partly sanded back for a patina, like the adjoining wharf, adding to the mix of natural materials used throughout the house. It's also inspired by this amazing rock platform. The levels of the house reinforce this idea of a projecting platform with its stepped deck, the entry platform and garden with views through the building. Patterns inspired by the moss, dappled sun and the tessellated rocks. Subtle details crafted by local tradesmen assisting in setting this building in its place and forming a destination for the occupants. A concrete sculpture was cast in our office and set within the 2 brickwork at the base of the house and offered as a housewarming present to the owners as the construction was nearing completion. The relief depicts a bush turkey, a native bird endemic to the area, which is notoriously territorial, guarding the entry to the house. The next project is at Smith Residence, which is in Cremorne in Sydney. This restores a large Federation house and adds a new living pavilion at the rear. The site has a north-facing rear yard with a large jacaranda tree and is listed as a contributory item to the heritage conservation area. Mostly large Federation-style houses within leafy suburban gardens. This is the existing house from the street with a poorly constructed rear addition. We re-established the original footprint under the pitched roof and constructed a new single-storey addition which opens out to the rear and a new eastern courtyard. The 2 primary building components on the front of the house, the bay window on the left and the veranda on the right, have been repeated in the rear facade. The roof of the new addition, roof of the veranda of the new addition on the right has been inverted to respond to the height and have greater visibility of the jacaranda tree. The kitchen on the left has been extended horizontally in a sculptural way to form a bay window. So there is this twist in the interpretation of the existing building elements. The existing veranda is horizontal in form, the new veranda is vertical. The existing bay window is vertical and at the rear is horizontal. So we think this creates this relationship between the 2 facades that ground the new work in its place and its heritage facade. This relationship has also been flipped in the plan along the line of the central hallway. Subtle shifts and curves create reference points to the curved corners, arches and vaulted ceilings in the existing building and slowly open the space as you travel through the building. These shifts in the sculptural form define separate zones within the open plan. Within the central courtyard, the roof kicks up at the junction to the existing roof, again to bind the architecture of the new and the old together and allows reflected western sun into the deck. A skylight mediates the transition between the existing and the new, and this shows the inverted relationship of the 2 veranda roofs. Just a quick walkthrough of the restored house with these beautiful vaulted ceilings and bay windows. The main bedroom here with the doors, with new northern doors opening up to the courtyard. The bathrooms are tiled in these small penny round mosaic tiles referencing the traditional tessellated tiles of the existing Federation home, and includes a secondary bay window in the shower which projects into the courtyard and faces back to the main bedroom. The family room opens out onto the deck and is partially screened from the living room. The dining space is gently compressed between the living room at one end with the veranda edge to the garden and the curved ceiling, and the kitchen at the other, which opens back to the courtyard and projects into the garden via the bay window. The detailing is fine grained to give a lightness to the facade, with textured walls appropriately scaled in reference to the traditional timber detailing and grandeur at the front of the house. The next project is a subdivision in Marrickville, which shows a contextual response to streetscape. This included construction of 2 semi-detached houses and acts as a model for small-scale urban consolidation that is sensitive to the existing housing pattern, built form and neighbourhood amenity. Our site was double the width of the typical blocks in the area with an eclectic mix of neighbours. The site had no real aspect except for this amazing patina painted corrugated iron shed running along the rear boundary. The subdivision and proposed building footprints match the immediate context, and the plans are different for each house relating to their orientation and our client's brief for a house for her to live in and a neighbour's house that she could rent or sell to finance the project. The design reinforces the predominant streetscape pattern with prominent roof lines extending over front verandas with narrow front gardens. The house presents as a single-storey structure to the street, with the upper level concealed behind the part hipped and part gabled roof form, mirroring the neighbouring scale and form. At the rear, elevated covered decks have been carved out from under the asymmetrical gable. The floor and the ceiling levels have been modulated to create a series of interlocking spaces yielding to the aspect and the light. Skylights and mezzanine bedroom spaces blur the boundaries of the central living area and provide light and ventilation to the compact building footprint. The centralised living space providing a protected environment for the owner's contemporary artwork collection. The external form of the building has been carved to include a series of negative spaces and site-specific artwork. This mural by Louise Tuckwell references 1950s garage door panels common to the area of Marrickville. These include a recessed entry veranda, a side-covered courtyard space, and the elevated decks at the rear. In our client's house, you enter into a sequence of spaces culminating in the gallery-like living room at the rear of the property, and beginning with this compressed space for the kitchen, which opens to the side-covered courtyard, which acts as an environmental buffer to the western sun. Beyond the kitchen is the space opens vertically and houses a 4-metre high sculpture, Kangalandaland, by artist Rosie Deacon, of a fluffy kangaroo in a long carnival skirt. This sits under a skylight which provides light into the centre of the house and also into the mezzanine bedroom via a series of hinged shutters. The sun comes through the skylight and bounces magnificent reflections off her green sequin dress onto the ceiling and the walls. The dining room is located at the transition to the changing floor level up to the living area, with built-in seating mirrored in the living room and salvaged light fittings. Windows and skylights have been located to capture light and aspect. The living room itself is divided into 2 zones, for sitting around the central fireplace and adjacent to the rear deck. The salvage brickwork party wall has been modified and modulated to conceal the structure and to blur the boundaries between the outdoor deck. Colour has been used to accentuate detail and adds another layer to our client's artwork. A partition wall divides the living area from a compact study with open framed shelving and a window seat projecting out into the garden on line with our client's favourite flowering gum. The mezzanine hall provides access to the bedrooms housed within the roof line, with the shutters providing additional light, cross ventilation and blurring the boundaries between public and private spaces. The ground floor bathroom is a cube of blue colour, while a more intense colour scheme was selected for the upper level bathroom to wake the kids up in the morning. This is a textured building full of detail and reflected light for our clients' eclectic art and furniture. Our next project is very different. We're looking at a very compact workers' cottage addition. Have I done something there?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. This aims to make the most of this heavily constrained site. Like a giant 3-dimensional puzzle, the building bulges to its maximum available building envelope to create a series of voluminous interlocked spaces in which the whole appears larger than the sum of its parts. At first glance, there seemed little hope for this tiny site. One block from Bondi Junction, bordered to the north by a 10-metre high wall and houses built to each side boundary. Access to space and light was heavily restricted. The heritage conservation area adding additional constraints. New work should be at the rear, concealed from the street and below the front ridgeline, leaving little room for additional building footprint or mass. Internally very run down series of rooms and poor access to an overgrown yard. 2 things caught our eye. A large plum tree and a fragment of sandstone at the base of the wall. The figure ground plan here shows this existing urban grain and the scale of that building to the north. Our design rearranges the side setback to include a courtyard and retains the footprint of the lean-to at the rear. The two front rooms are retained and a hallway extends past a new bathroom into a living room, opening in turn to the rear terrace flanked by a galley kitchen. An additional bedroom and ensuite is located upstairs. The living room is the key to this house. It's built to both side boundaries, making the most of the 4.5 metre wide site. In a singular gesture, the ceiling extends back to the existing ridge, then follows the roof slope down to the front door. A high-pitched skylight acts like a scoop to direct northern light in midwinter deep into the house, reflected off the internal walls of the room and through the stair to the hallway. The double height ceiling adds much needed internal volume and visually link all the surrounding spaces. The mezzanine bedroom bridges over the hallway with open walls at each end to afford well-rated volume and ventilation. Bathrooms are tightly planned around the courtyard. Steps lead up into the living room where the full volume of the site is gained. A series of carefully orchestrated openings provide aspect and spatial connections, with a singular joinery unit extending from the living room into the kitchen, which is subtly considered as an external space with the same floor material used in the courtyard. The brick skirting is extended into the living room as a plinth to house the fireplace. The ceiling is further differentiated by colour and together with the floor creates a blurred boundary between what is inside and what is outside, and this extends over the terrace to partly conceal the neighbouring wall and frame the sandstone fragment. The kitchen extends into the rear easement with a set of doors stacked into the returning corner of the living room. The palm tree is retained and acts as a focal point. With the rear facade considered as a mini fragment of the existing wall and frames aspect to the sky. A steel planter bed maintains the natural ground level at the base of the palm, and high-level windows filters summer sun and is positioned to frame the palm from within the living room. The southern wall of the living room acts as a reflector for the high-level northern skylight and provides frame views into the courtyard and direct cross ventilation. The stair to the hall in the bedroom has been extended to form a bench seat under the skylight. This ceiling plane continues into the bedroom with stacking doors creating flexibility for use as a sitting room and to conceal the ensuite. And openings to the other side continue this ceiling plane and act like a funnel for natural light into the entry. The material palette gets simple and robust and blurs the boundaries between inside and outside and adjoining structures. Recycled bricks and flooring link the house to the neighbouring wall, thereby blurring the extents of ownership and cadastral boundaries. Internal openings between rooms, large sliding doors and screens, and the use of colour. And the extension of materials and joinery between different rooms further extend these perceived spatial boundaries, making the house seem larger than it is. Okay, back to Marrickville again. This is a small development for a private client. This subdivides one suburban block into three and shows how contemporary small-scale urban consolidation can be achieved in a way that is sympathetic to existing structures, maintains the amenity of adjoining properties, the cultural fabric of the area, and offers a positive contributory character to the street. The corner block was larger than the surrounding blocks, and there were several structures, including a Federation bungalow with a somewhat unsympathetic upper level addition, and a series of compound-like outbuildings at the rear, presenting high walls to the side street. Although there are no heritage restrictions on the site, we retained the house and converted it into 2 houses by the construction of a new party wall through the middle of the building. A third lot was created for the construction of a new detached house. Council's controls for subdivision required lots to be consistent in size, shape, orientation and frontage to the adjoining lots. This subdivision needed to follow the pattern for the existing house, but the third lot shape and frontage was inconsistent. So the design of the house needed to address council's objectives for built form and streetscape pattern in order to gain approval for the whole development. This resulted in a 2-storey terrace typology along Stanley Street and a single-storey detached house typology with a narrow effective frontage along Lilydale Street to ensure that the new work will be consistent in scale, height and streetscape design. Careful studies of the context established predominant setbacks, street patterns and built form. Importance was placed on the breaking down of the scale of the whole development into individually designed houses with their own identity and character. The dominant upper level mansard roof was removed and replaced with a new facade, which references the form of the adjoining terraces. This has been split into 2 to provide a unified frontage but defined character for each house. The keystone brickwork and stucco render has been extended in an abstract pattern sympathetic to the Federation base. The proportional wall to window ratio on the upper level creates a more solid appearance akin to the adjoining terraces. The brickwork is corbelled and chamfered in a decorative way to create a double height keyhole veranda and picking up the detail of the corbelled sill support of the existing window. On the right, the brick and stucco pillars have been extended to create an upper level balcony to the second lot. This provides deep shade to the street facing bedrooms and upper level balcony with framed views over Marrickville. A kickback roof has been added to the side of the house, creating an elongated entry veranda from Stanley Street, which extends along the side boundary of Lilydale Street, right to the entrance point. And to a covered deck at the rear of the house. The irregular space post will eventually be covered with vines activating the corner and frames an original window salvaged from the house. Internally, most of the original building fabric has been retained, and we carefully replanned the inside to suit the existing walls to minimise unnecessary structural work and fully refurbish the interiors for sale as 1 3-bedroom and 1 4-bedroom house to fund the development. At the rear of the building, some of the walls were removed and the building footprint has been extended slightly to create open plan living spaces that connect to new decks and private open spaces within the rear garden. The design of the new house needed to be carefully considered to continue that streetscape pattern in rhythm with the neighbouring houses. This was particularly important as the proposed lot shape and frontage was inconsistent, so the approval of the subdivision was dependent on the resolution of the design to continue this streetscape rhythm. A U-shaped plan was developed around the central courtyard. Living spaces are located along the southern boundary and open to a northern deck located within the courtyard, and an eastern deck adjacent to the kitchen. Flexible bedroom spaces flank the eastern edge, with an ensuite housed within the northern return wing. This generally followed the footprint of the sheds on the site, but more importantly created these 2 narrow building frontages to Lilydale Street, with the courtyard in the middle, creating the negative space, typically associated with the setbacks between adjoining buildings. The entry activates the street, and the alignment of the frontage, matches all the neighbouring buildings and incorporates similar building language, including a relatively narrow front setback, a small garden strip, a small front veranda, and an awning roof. And within these sensitive streetscape parameters, the building is unapologetically contemporary, with bespoke detailing providing an individual identity separate from the other houses, clad entirely in timber. The plan form and awning are joyfully sculptural and organic, responding to the setting and aspect. The design addresses passive sustainable design principles, with the circular planning offering multiple orientation, direct connection to the northern courtyard and the street, with controlled daylight and cross ventilation, and meet strict aircraft acoustic requirements. The elevated floor structure and the central courtyard act to passively cool the house and trap the sun. Windows are carefully shaded to suit their orientation, and the thin building footprint provides direct natural cross ventilation. Ceiling heights are modulated to minimise heights to neighbouring properties and to define individual spaces. High windows are carefully positioned to provide views and control indirect daylight, which bounces off the high internal walls throughout the day. The kitchen and the dining room are open to a small deck. Which is partially framed by an existing shed wall, providing access to a small kitchen garden with a remnant shed wall. Bathrooms and bedrooms are arranged with easterly aspect and incorporate a series of large sliding doors for flexible use as secondary living spaces, music rooms or study spaces. And these offers views into the courtyard by the opening up of the facade. The return wing contains the ensuite and acts as a giant privacy screen to prevent sight lines from the two-storey buildings to the north, and creates a cocoon-like interior space open to the courtyard and flooded with light. The new work has been joyously stitched to the existing building fabric and nuance from a relationship to place and aspect, and providing a positive contribution to the streetscape, not often seen in these types of small-scale developments. Okay, now to the northern beaches of Sydney, where we have recently completed a new house, very different. Our clients have a passion for mid-century modernist design and hold an enviable collection of furniture and memorabilia from that period. They wanted a family home that reflected the best of the 50s and the 60s, that spoke of optimism, innovation, community-mindedness and generosity. Like a three-dimensional artwork, the house incorporates a series of planar colours, patterns and natural materials. These are applied to surfaces to explode the rigid geometric spatial planes and offer a joyous and inviting backdrop to the street. Our site is in North Bargala and has easterly views out to Manly in a very suburban context. Close to the corner, meaning 7 neighbours. Our clients ask that we reference the existing 1950s home occupied by them for generations and take advantage of the view and the borrowed landscape of the backyards on the left and screen the neighbour on the right and incorporate lots of hidden storage. 2 simple cubic forms have been arranged on the site to align with the adjoining structures. On the ground level, the building is pushed to the side boundary to reduce visibility of and overlooking from the neighbour. This creates a series of omnipresent outdoor spaces running the full length of the site. The upper level partly overhangs the garden and accommodates bedrooms, bathrooms and a covered balcony. The upper level is deftly held along the southern edge by a paperclip supporting post and provides cover to the entry garden and living room terrace. A pinwheel circulation system connects the levels internally via a stair marking the entry and externally by a spiral stair connecting the terrace back down to the balcony. A series of open and covered outdoor spaces are sequentially arranged through the length of the site, including an 18-metre long gravel and cactus garden, a covered entry with pond and adjoining covered living room terrace, an open raked courtyard garden, a terrace with pergola and roof which extends into the rear yard. Each outdoor space is connected directly to an internal space, the entry, the living room and covered terrace here, the dining room and courtyard space, the family room and pool. The living room terrace connects to the upper level balcony, which has been carved out of the building form with the spiral stair, has views to the east from the balcony and also from the main bedroom. Individual spaces and the circulation system are subtly defined by joinery units, creating a hierarchy between public and private spaces. On the ground level, 2 freestanding pods define 3 separate living spaces, one lined with timber and the other black and shiny, with integrated doors, all concealed with storage. The pods define twin circulation spines. On the northern side, an 18-metre long wall-hung unit, flanked with seating at each end and storage, extends into the kitchen and back through into the family room. A high-level window allows northern light and ensures privacy from the neighbour. The southern circulation spine is more permeable to the gardens and incorporates blinds and curtains. Upstairs, joinery defines public and private spaces as well, as does the freestanding stone chimney, and incorporate display for much loved collectibles. Horizontal strip windows, frame views and seating nooks. Joinery defines circulation zones and integrate specific client requirements. A void is carved within the centre of the house, incorporating the stair with a high-pitched skylight combined with an external void in the roof and the floor, which draws light and air through the house and also the garden. Strip windows on the eastern and western facades are screened by awning fittings incorporated into the glazing mullions. Individual building components incorporate natural materials and a series of graphically bold patterns, textures and nostalgically contemporary colours, which offer a joyous backdrop to the daily lives of our clients and their collection, as well as a physical and emotional generosity to the street. We received these photos from my clients a few months after they moved in. A neighbour asked to use the side wall of the house to project a twin session of How to Train Your Dragon and Beauty and the Beast for their child's birthday party. This was enjoyed by the locals and people passing by and shows the spirit embodied within the house. But I should talk about bricks too. So, bricks. I'll show just briefly 3 separate projects, specifically just relating to the use of bricks, which we've been experimenting with lately. The first project is our polychrome project, which is a full refurbishment of a 4 units, including a formal subdivision of each of the units. We were presented with this 1960s red textured brick walk-up in Newtown with very poor street presence. We took it on board to reuse the existing building rather than to demolish it, and we wanted to inject the building, I guess, with a more positive streetscape contribution and mediate some of the internal planning issues. We thought that bricks were an obvious choice to make because it's so dominant in this building, And so we tested all these contemporary brick samples so that we can try and link the new work that we do back to the red textured brickwork. Now, in looking at this, we were looking at colour as well as patterning and texture in a slightly abstract way, and we settled on these barrel blue bricks and this mix of gratuitous brown brick. And when we lay these on flat, we are able to see the internal core of the brick, which has this beautiful abstract pattern, irregular pattern, and that pattern is generated by the clay base of the brick and where it is located in the block when the bricks are fired to temperature. So the bricks on the outside of the block, the centre section is smaller because it's cooked more, and in the centre of the block you get a much more open texture of the existing clay brickwork. And so we use these bricks to kind of create this contemporary language between the old building and the new work that we're doing, to create sections of paving and pillars and other architectural elements to help subtly define a transition from the street into the existing building to give it some sort of streetscape presence. And so we created these series of public and semi-public spaces with these architectural elements, and brick was quite critical in that decision. We also fully refurbished the interiors of the buildings, and we wanted to bring that language of brickwork on the outside into the interior. So we started looking at ways of turning the brickwork into a decorative element in some of the new walls we were building inside the units. We used a combination of recycled bricks and commons, and we cut these common bricks into 3 profiles to create these corbelled pillars and projecting shelves within each of the units. This is a shot during construction and an image of the completed corner. The commons have been laid in a stack bond with flush joints, and the recycled brickwork has been laid in an irregular stretcher bond with recessed mortar. And that made us start thinking about this language of brickwork and how we might apply that when we're faced with other buildings that have brickwork as quite an important narrative to their story, like this pair of Federation semi-detached houses that we've recently completed. This is in Camperdown, which is just around the corner from our Newtown project, in a heritage conservation area. And again, we carefully looked at matching the brickwork in terms of its colour, and we necessarily needed to reconstruct front veranda, which needed to be sensitively done because of the streetscape heritage issues. So we laid these bricks as a facing on their edge to again show this irregular patterning within the core of the brick, and in some ways picks up this reference, contemporary reference to the existing brickwork and tile work even to the existing building. We also needed to reconstruct these projecting thin party walls that extend out to the existing front brick fence. And we picked up, we laid these bricks on their side, and we selected a very dark brick so that it matched the dark banding in the existing facade. And we twisted the end of the brick with, again, this cut brick profile, this one in a bird's beak motif, to try and hint at some of the work that we were doing internally. So, because there was demolition work on this side, we were very conscious about reusing as much of the existing fabric as possible. So we salvaged all the brickwork and we created this new brick wall in the centre of the house. This creates its physical and spiritual centre of the plan and acts as a backdrop to the living room, the fireplace around, and a floor threshold between the hall and the stair. We asked the builder to carefully grade the bricks into 3 categories. The best bricks were cut into 2 types. One cut was in the plan and one cut was in the section. Okay. The second grade bricks were used for the stack bond brickwork, and the lowest grade bricks were going to be used for a section of roughly laid brickwork. So this creates this very intricate assemblage of fluted, corbelled, projecting and chamfered brickwork. So this is our builder, our brickwork brickie, who actually loved it, surprisingly. You would think he would, and would think that I need to be on more medication, but he really enjoyed it, and told me that he was, or the builder told me that he was, inviting all his mates around to have a look at it. And he was showing pictures to his wife when he got home about the brickwork he's been doing and all these kind of things. Which I think is telling about the relationship of architecture, I guess, in terms of a practice of drawing from our perspective, but also a practice of acknowledging the skill and craftsmanship of the people who actually build these buildings, which I think is very important. And that at each opportunity, if you want a really good building, I think you need to have people building it who are 100% engaged and value add. And so we found that in this process, which was a lovely surprise. So this is our wall in the middle of the house. It's set very close to the edge of a very long linear skylight which runs through the whole of the upper level so that we can draw light straight down. And it creates this beautiful backdrop to the living space. We were able to have a situation where we were double layering the projecting brick shelves by carefully tying in those bricks back into the substrate, as well as creating a single projecting brick platform. And it creates this beautiful shelving arrangement where the owners can personalise their space and show the objects that they might have. And we love the fact that when the bricks are cut, when the bricks are cut at this angle right here, that's the frog in the middle of the brick. And it creates this beautiful arrowhead, which we loved when the render is set flush and projected up into that. It creates this beautiful little pattern. So it's set incredibly close to the edge of the hallway when you first walk in, and it seems unnerving at first because you're not quite sure what's happening when you first walk in, but then you slowly reveal this beautiful fluted edge. It's almost like a Greek fluted column in a way, and it touches that edge so finely. It's beautiful, I think, anyway. Okay, so this is my last one. We're building a house in Riverview, which has a beautiful backdrop to a reserve which goes on to Sydney Harbour. And this is a very organic house, which is framed up now and clad, and we have this arrangement along the site that is linear, where we have a single-storey structure on the left-hand side and a double-storey structure on the right-hand side. Within this single-storey structure houses a linear entrance point, and on the left of this image is the principal living room, and beyond that is a dining room. And we had this idea of creating a double-fronted fireplace that can be visible from within the living room as well as the dining space. and we wanted to create this brick sculpture around the centre to suddenly define these two spaces. So this double fireplace, I guess, acts as this little floating object, and we wanted to continue this theme that we've been exploring about the craftsmanship of brickwork and how to lay that brickwork. So this fireplace was a little bit more complicated. It needed very specific vent requirements, and we used all of those, I think you'd call them constraints, but they're really opportunities to do something interesting. So we divided the fireplace into two components. At the base around the fireplace is black, and the surrounding area around it will be a different type of brickwork in a traditional brick. And where there is necessary to be ventilation, we used our cut bricks to provide that ventilation. So it created this very intricate diagram that we needed to resolve in a technical way, but also make sure that it has a degree of poetry to it. We used three brick cuts here, A, B and C, and we also used two different types of bricks. So at the different ventilation points, you can see in the little sectional plan diagrams up the top up here, we were able to create ventilation in this area and in through here, so that the heat can vent out, and it needs to be a certain distance from the ceiling level as is required. We also needed ventilation on the side of the chimney here, and we're able to produce these beautiful ledges in a traditional way where you would have them made to level the fireplace. We also then thought that it would be lovely to introduce within this complicated assemblage this language of rough brick versus stacked block brickwork, which we did. So our rough brickwork is the areas which are painted in the green, and we wanted also to extend that brickwork patterning up into the chimney. I only have a few more slides. So within all of this geometry, there's this complex arrangement of resolution of technical components and maintaining the poetry of what we want to try and achieve. We used a split brick, 50 millimetres high for the brickwork at the base of the fireplace and the fire storage area, and we just used common bricks for the remaining brickwork. So this is our brick layer, starting to set out the geometry of the brickwork around the fireplace. We needed to be careful about the angle here because we needed to tell the builder initially what this angle will need to be so that these bricks all line up all the way down. This is the stair that goes down from the entry down into the dining room. And you can see here on the corner he's laying the thin bricks here and the standard common bricks here. And at the edge here is this decorative element. And we're also providing ventilation back into the area in through here for the firebox. So there was many emails and texts because we're on the Central Coast. It takes us 2 hours to get to site. So we often communicate via messaging and images and things like that. So he sends photos during construction and we say, this is good and this is not good, or whatever, and we work it all out together in a collaborative way. So this is the brickwork as it's starting to go up. And these are little opportunities to create nice details for ventilation in the end of the stacked split brick, where we're showing the end of the brick rather than the whole face of the brick. And at corners, we're using these little elements of the stacked common brick, sitting slightly proud of the irregular, rough, common brickwork. And that beautiful mottled corner that the builder, the bricklayer, has achieved for us in there. And we also have this, the builder calls it a crocodile tower, I'm not quite sure. That's probably quite apt. It's a little bit like a crocodile. But you can see there's my builder, Paul, and you can see how this object sits within this overall, building form. Really as this standalone object underneath these two kind of vaulted, if you like, extruded building forms. So this is the dining room side, which also includes the ventilation and some projecting shelves. And our intention really is to paint all of the brickwork above the stacked bond brickwork, so that we get more of a contrast between those, so that the textural component between the stacked bond with the flush mortar and the irregular stack with the recessed mortar becomes more prominent. And a final shot of the top of the fireplace. So that's all.
You both have slightly different ways of organising your practices, so perhaps David, you start and explain to people how you operate, because you work very hands-on, very small scale in a sense, but quite broadly in terms of the way that you approach those projects, and then probably maybe you can follow on.
Well, I guess in terms of the practice, I have a little studio. It's actually in our house, which is nice. So we live in a beautiful area surrounded by beaches and water and national parks and all these kind of things. But because it's close to, that metropolitan hub of Sydney, I started the practice when I was in Sydney, and we were living there, and then we decided to move up to the Central Coast. And because I think I had that access to a set of clients, and we were able to maintain the momentum of the projects that we had in Sydney, which was quite good. And for me, it was about maintaining a small profile, because I don't really stressed out, and I want to have work from 9 to 5 and then go and do something else. And I want to achieve a nice life balance. So it's about, for me, not just expanding at every opportunity, although I probably could do that with the number of projects that I have, because I think I would go mad. So we tend to be selective about the projects that we take on. We have a lot of repeat clients, interestingly, and we've been approached now by small-scale developers doing these small little subdivision projects, which kind of keeps on adding to this little momentum of slightly larger scale work, and not so much concentrating on some of the smaller alterations projects anymore, because we have the opportunity to do larger, if on very large alterations or new houses, and the focus really is to try and get a good match with a client and an interesting site for us, I guess, and maintain a good kind of design quality. There's only myself and one other person at the moment, a graduate architect, registered, and so it's lovely to have such a small kind of studio environment, and we travel down to Sydney about once a week, because most of our work is there, and I have 4 or 5 meetings a day, and I time those meetings either side of the peak hour traffic, which can be quite horrendous. So logistically arranging a singular line around Sydney often is a bit difficult, but kind of timing all of those projects to make that the most efficient way is quite good, because you see a variety of things. So we might have a client presentation, a couple of those go out to site during the middle of the day when the client's at home, have an early meeting with the client if they're working, and then have a late afternoon meeting or something like that, or they come home a bit earlier. So that's kind of how we structure the work.
I was just trying to think how I know what we do. What do we do?
Maybe tell a story at lunchtime about starting small and growing.
Yeah, I think I ended up it was funny, when I started out of Woodmarsh, there was a Czech guy working in the office who sort of reported to me because no one else could give him any work. And he was like an intern that had come, I don't know where he'd come from. And then when I was leaving, they were like, well, there's no work for Lucas, you can get it. And I was like, well, so I said to Lucas, do you want to work for me? So I didn't really have a job, but I had a job to, a project that because I was doing all these silly little decorative things and kitchens and bathrooms, and I ended up, that was the first sort of realisation I had after 6 months of working for myself, is that I was on the road all the time meeting with clients and choosing things that he sort of sat on my dining room table and just pumped the work out. And it wasn't until then that I was like, right, I can't have 32 little tiny jobs as a sole practitioner, you need to actually win some work. And so it seems so ridiculous, but sometimes you've got to have these sort of moments. And the same thing happened about a year ago when we were like, I think I've been really bad at always saying yes. I was never good at saying no, and I think that's such a fundamental thing to do, because I don't like, maybe it's a bit of FOMO, fear of missing out on what could be a really great project, but I think it's also sometimes that you think, oh, that person seems really nice, and I'm sure we could do something really good, and you forget, architecture is not a single job. I'm not selling someone a table that takes maybe a couple of hours of convincing them. It's a 3-year commitment, and that's the thing, is it's very easy if a project is not holding your attention, it's very easy to, I think you often need that passion about a project and that love for a project to actually inspire you to keep the tenacity that you need in architecture to do good work, because the tenacity is one of the, tenacity and patience, I think they're the 2 key traits that an architect needs, really. And so it's interesting, and so in the last year, we've really, I sort of hate turning down work, but I've turned it into positive. I now recommend a lot of other practitioners in Melbourne who might be 5 years behind us or 10 years behind us who are doing this fantastic, people coming through. So I then feel good that I've not just said no to a potential client, that I'm actually facilitating and handballing or guiding work. They still have to win it on their own merits, but guiding work to really capable, talented people. And then I think the exciting thing is then when you can actually say, right, is this the project we want to do, and being selective, and you sort of touched on it, and I think actually really sometimes actually remembering that a client's not just interviewing you, you should be interviewing them. And we've made mistakes where we've taken on jobs and think, why did they hire us? Like, our taste is so far from, and like we're just on the poles apart. And I think that suitability, which then leads to trust, as I touched on, and I think trust is another very important, particularly residential, because you're trying to gain people's trust, but it's even necessary in public and commercial work as well. So I mean, in the office we have, the way, as a sole director, I've always found it difficult, because obviously my name's on the door, and the way I've always dealt with it is I always have, I've got a fantastic, very talented team that all, I value their design skills enormously. So I don't sit in an ivory tower, draw by myself and handle a bit of yellow trace. We've always designed everything collaboratively, because I think 2 minds will achieve better than me sitting by myself. And I need to talk about it. I need to sort of workshop the ideas. So the project architect joins me at the first briefing with the client, and it also then really helps to show the client that this person's not just a drafting service, that they are a key person, and it builds trust between them, and it then gives me the ability to sort of not step back. I'm very involved throughout the whole process, but I can't answer every email quickly. I'm often in meetings or on site and those things, and so then the clients start to see that it's very much a teamwork. We might have a graduate, a project architect, myself. We used to have an interior designer, so that there's often 4 people working on their project. Which, and I think not all architects. A lot of architects. I've had a lot of architects work for me who've gone on and started their own practice and are doing very well, and I'm very supportive of that, because some people can begrudge people moving on. I would have been more upset if they went to work for somebody else, I think. But I think I always wanted to do it, so you can't begrudge that. And I think that's fantastic because I'm very transparent, and I've always, even business decisions, I'm like, right, what do I do? What does everyone think? And we have a meeting about, should we do X? And I think that actually falls into where I think the importance in mentoring happens, is that as much as I learned so much working for Woodmarsh, Randall and Roger, hugely in design and running projects. I learned nothing from them about running a practice. I'm probably glad I probably didn't. As much as I love them and respect them and know them well and see them frequently, but it was a very close shop because it didn't, I didn't need to be privy to it. Whereas I really feel like from being very transparent and open, and I've got nothing to hide because there's not much money in architecture, so there's nothing to sort of shy away from. But I think that that's another part of this external mentoring that I do, and then that mentoring inside the practice, I think, is a really important thing to do.
I'd just make an additional. No, that one's not there. Make an additional comment to add to that. You touched upon the trust aspect and various other things, but also it's key who you employ, and that you've been very careful and selective about the people you employ, because you then trust them with the work that you're doing, and that you feel it's appropriate then for you to put in the energy to mentor them. So it's a sort of balancing act about how you structure your practice, but then also that you only employ the people that you care, that you want to spend that time with. So that's an important aspect. Bob had some questions.
As someone who did what you guys are doing 45 years ago, and setting up in a living room with a couple of partners, and they got left behind in the practice that you stepped out of to make it work, we all had great aspirations about where that might take us. And once I understand how David makes it work, with your staff of 9 or 10, that's pretty tough on the kind of projects that one understands what you're doing. I just wonder what the aspirations that you have going forward might change the kind of pursuit in materiality, project type, and idea that might develop beyond the kind of currency of idea as you go and develop.
I think that's really that. In the last couple of years, I feel like I've been spreading myself too thin, and to top it off, having 2 little kids is always a good equaliser. We farmed them out a bit this week over school holidays to their grandmas, and Ben and I were at work till 10 and back at work at 7:30, and we were like, thank God we had children, and as you stop working, you actually go home, you've got another purpose. But it's those kind of realisations that then make you say, well, I can't facilitate this many clients. The guys in the office are each running 1 or 2 too many jobs. And so that's where you start to say, right, well, I need to be more selective. Well, we've shut for a year, but at the same time say, well, we can't do houses under 1.5, and we're trying to target bigger, very selective work with developers, because we've also had experience we thought, oh, we'll put our toe in the multi-res, and we've had 2 tricky, the grass seems always greener, and then I'm like, back to residential, let's go back to houses, at least the clients listen to me, the developers don't always listen to me, so, I don't know, I think it's really healthy. I never wrote a business plan, I never really had any ambition, all I knew is I didn't want to do skyscrapers, I wanted to do smaller work, probably the opposite of you, Bob. Well, every guy wants to do a skyscraper. I think every girl wants to do a school. I want to do a school, I want to do a school, a kindergarten, a museum, a library. But it's healthy to constantly reassess. And actually, I think I was finding I just get on this treadmill and I just all day I'm putting out fires, and you never lift your head, and then all of a sudden you're about to crash and burn, and you're like, oh, I can actually say no, I don't have to do that, or so it's real. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it's very easy to get on that treadmill, and I think it's important to sort of stand back and also remember that you're part of a team, and that you shouldn't. I've realised that it's not just about me making decisions; it's really the office now, group collectively is more making the decisions. Like, right, should we take on this job? They're like, no, you hated working with them last time. I'm like, oh, that's right. I told you, it's like, I forget, because they remember, because they're, so it's interesting.
I'll just say one thing.
But having worked on very large projects over the last 30 years or so, I'm currently doing a house for my son in Melbourne with not a great success, so I've had to ask Claire, how do I do this?
Anytime, Bob, anytime.
I think it's more the council problems that you're going through that
Yeah.
many of us have to deal with. I think there's also an inherent, well, without saying it, you've got a kind heart, and that's what's driving what you do, and that you want to find a solution to every problem, and now you're learning that you can't have a solution to every problem. And so it is important to understand that we can't do everything, and we have to make a decision sometimes that you say no, and that's what we're coming to realise. In whatever way you've done it, you've been able to make it work so far. But as you were describing earlier today, you come to a point where there are too many of those small jobs taking up all of your time and your team's time that you have to then, because you are being approached for the larger projects, that you can now have balance and that you can do things a little differently. And it's important for those in the audience to understand that there are those choices you can make. First of all, there's a choice as to where you work, and then there's a choice as to who you work for in terms of clients and what kind of projects you get involved in, but also in terms of even within the scale of work, there are different types of clients, and you somehow learn. In Victoria, perhaps you know also about the small practice network and the medium practice network, and that's a very important thing that's just developed in Victoria. Do you want to comment on that perhaps a little? Because there's a group in Victoria that's now established itself as a way of networking within the architectural community about the problems we all face and sharing that knowledge and that information without fear or failure.
Yeah, the small practice forum's been around for quite a long time, and I took a while to discover it. Being a part for 4 or so years, I'm probably a little bit on the big side for it, but I still attend, and it was getting bigger and bigger. It's held at the Institute, facilitated by the Institute, and then a few of us, Matt Gibson sort of led the way, but we decided that it would make sense to start a medium practice, so more 5 to up to 20 really, size practices. And we're convinced that the Institute that we could run ourselves, we didn't need staff member. It's held there though, and we tend to meet once every 6 to 8 weeks. And the idea is it wasn't allowed to compete with CPD. It's really a forum, so it's about sharing ideas. And I think at one meeting I missed, people started talking about percentage fees, and that was shut down because it's considered collusion. But it's not, it's not about it. But it's really about share tactics on solving client problems or contracts or whatever. And so quite often Matt's been curating it, and he'll say, right, okay, can you give a talk on this? Simon Dodd from BKK will give a talk on this. Each year we have different talks every couple of months. And it's hugely beneficial because I've learned so much from both small practice and medium practice forum, from other people's mishaps and mistakes, to then be able to avoid those yourself. Or we had someone email the other day saying, I'm looking for a engineer that can do this, or does anyone know someone who can do that? Or when I got into started to price multi-res, I had no idea what to price it as. So I contacted Karen Wilcock from ex-Air Metro, does a lot of multi-res, and she was like, absolutely, and helped with what exclusions we should put in. And there's this fantastic collegiate culture in Melbourne, and it's really strange, and I think it's quite unique to this generation. Probably 45, 30 to 45-year-olds, and I don't really know what instigated it, but it's hugely powerful. And Sean Carter Lewis and Sean Carter from the New South Wales president, often has spoken to us about it, people who are in it, and even came down, I think, to the Vic Awards last year to try and understand why the Vic Awards are such a success, and Sydney's always been uptight, apparently. I've never been. Apparently it is. Everyone doesn't like each other, and I don't know what the story is. Anyway,
That's Sydney.
No,
it's not
true. No, isn't it? Okay. But anyway, they were talking about potentially trying to start something like this. And anyway, I suppose it sounds crazy, but Instagram has also been another fantastic connecting device over the last couple of years. And I think it strengthens our bond, but it's given me fantastic relationships. It's like sort of internet dating. It's people that I only meet a year after sort of commenting on, people in Queensland and Perth, and that's been a fantastic sort of mechanism, and it's so supportive in that it's always like, wow, that project looks great, or it's great to see things under construction on site, not just the shiny publicity photos at the end of the project.
Okay,
I just want to ask David, having sat on the Newcastle jury just recently, the kind of protective attitude that seemed to exist in that region, as opposed to people coming in to do work, and you coming out of the Northern Beaches and that kind of region coming back in to Sydney. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that dynamic that seems to exist in that area and the effect it might have on your work?
That's interesting because when I finished studying in Newcastle, I was there for 5 years and then another 1 year and then another 1 year, so it's 7 years all up. And then I moved to Sydney and I started working with some practices and started my own practice then in Sydney. And then when my wife and I had our first child, we realised that our flat was too small, so we needed to, go somewhere. So we thought, my wife's sister had a house in Hamilton that she wasn't using for 6 months, so we said, right, I've got an established, little network in Sydney now where I'm getting, these small projects coming in, and I was just working from home. And so we house minded their property for a time. And when I spoke to people in Newcastle, when we moved up there, and I did have a network of friends there and all those kind of things, but so I'm an architect and I do most of my work in Sydney, and it only takes a couple of hours to get up to Newcastle, so not very far from Sydney. They go, do you want to work in Sydney for? Newcastle's big enough, it's got so much happening and whatever, and it is a fantastic city. And then when I met new clients who knew of my work in Sydney, and I said, well, I'm living up in Newcastle. Oh no, we don't want a Newcastle architect, we want a Sydney architect. So it was this weird, relationship between Newcastle and Sydney as two big cities, kind of competing and having their own identity, and both being quite proud, of them. And we ended up moving to the Central Coast, which in actual fact is almost exactly the same drive time, because I need to go in and around and then back down again because we're opposite Pittwater, basically. And then I started meeting, new clients, and you live at Pretty Beach. Oh, that's so beautiful there. We love it there. We've often got holidays there, so there wasn't that same negative connotation of being remote to Sydney, which was interesting. But I've been approached by a couple of people in Newcastle to do some work, but I think going the other way on the freeway is just another stretch too far for me in terms of, just the extra time it takes to go the opposite way all the time, and the projects haven't been kind of large enough in order to kind of warrant that extra trip. But I've been also approached by people out in more rural areas, and I like those types of projects as well. One of the slides I showed was a Central Coast one in the SketchUp model, which is a large rural estate, basically. And so, we still have a good opportunity to do some interesting work in different areas.
a question that came through during your talk, David, that you can probably both answer, but specifically for you, given how crafted and handmade your work is. The question states, what are your thoughts on 3D printed homes in the near future?
I don't know anything about that. But you could do a beautiful to build it now, couldn't you?
You could.
Yeah. So I'd be fine with it if it works, and you can do something beautiful and be probably much more organic. I think people are using 3D printing and just building normal houses at the moment.
Yes.
I think there's so much more opportunity.
It all comes down to imagination in the end, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Everything that we do.
We could craft the whole building, not just individual little pieces. That would be good.
Yes. We've had such a great turnout tonight. Does anyone have a burning question? Come on, I'm sure someone's got
There's a bottle of champagne over there.
Okay, we'll keep going. You've got
I do
another
have a
one.
question.
Oh, there we go.
It's not really about architecture, it's more about work-life balance. I'm
That's okay.
fascinated practice of 9 people and having small children and, you know, retain some clarity about what you're doing.
Can't you see I'm a mess? Look, it's all I say is don't do what I did, but I think you just do. Well, I started the practice when I was 29, and then, you know, I think people always say, oh, should I have the children first or start the practice? I might just do whatever you want, really. But I started the practice and then it sort of started to establish itself. But the challenge then becomes, especially when you're a sole director, how do you keep that practice ticking along? So that's when I stopped doing any retail, because the retail just moved so quickly, and I really had to, whereas residential clients, you can stretch them a little bit and they can plod a little bit slower, and in a way, I suppose being a sole practitioner would have been worse because you had sort of no one to leave the work to, but it basically meant I was back at the office with the 2-week-old under the desk. I think the circumstances were that we were in a different building and Ben was on the top floor, and I look at, you know, scheduled meetings, and I had some, you know, I did push most clients off for the first 2 or 3 months and had very little client interface, and I wasn't working full time, so I'd sort of come and go, but, you know, I don't know, that's what I'm saying, don't do what I did, but it's, you just do what, well, I don't know, I remember feeling, and it just came to me, but it was very different with my first and my second. The first one I felt a lot of obligation that if I didn't keep working, I wasn't a serious architect. And I think when the practice is young, I think my reins are a bit tighter on it, and I've always had quite young, you know, I've sort of mentored young people up to sort of more experienced. I've never felt that I could afford some big senior architect to come in and help manage the practice. Second time around, 3 years later, I really had more confidence in myself to say, you know what, I'm just going to say, no, I can't meet that client, you know, I need more time off or whatever. I still brought the baby in 2 weeks, but it was more just having more boundaries in place. And I think that that's really important. I think the other thing I would say is, I think it's very important, it's not just a women's problem. I think it's really important that there's more acceptance of men and women working part-time, because I think we're trying to get more women back into serious roles, so we're not letting the men out, because we need both people looking after the kids, and I think that's a really important. I think even Ben, who's my husband's very hands-on, is a fantastic dad, and I mean I probably would say I do most of the drop-offs and pickups, but he does them if I schedule them in. You know, I sort of prefer that he doesn't want to ask me to. But as in, I prefer not to have a regular, you know, I prefer that I'll do most of them, but then, you know, if I need you to do Wednesday night or he's there tonight, I'll drop it off tomorrow morning, and he just has to do what I ask him to do. But
Did you take the baby to site?
no, so I would book him in. If I had a client coming in, I'd take the basket upstairs and put them up there, and he'd have to prop the thing, and then that client would go on and bring it back down. I took them to site and papoose, probably totally, you know, wrongly, and but I know he felt a lot of pressure, even though his business partners were family orientated, that he couldn't. I don't know, just that you know, it's totally unacceptable for a man to work 4 days, or they're not considered serious about their career. And I think that's a really big. You know, there's so much talk about women. I think there needs to be more talk about men. And I always love that Andy Wong, who's a associate director at Waddles, really great guy in Melbourne, and I found out recently he works 4 days a week, and he's really senior, very well regarded in Melbourne, and has 3 kids. And I ran into him one day in Fitzroy during the middle of the day pushing a pram. I said, what the hell are you doing? And I said to him, and he said, I work 4 days. And I thought, that's brilliant, you know, and that we should see more of that, because Anthony Martin, you know, his wife was a lawyer, so she probably earns more, so that made more sense. But you know, but it's so important, and it's and I actually think when you have more time away from the office, it's actually healthier that you clear your mind and you actually think, and you the worst thing can be is stress, because you can't design when you're stressed. You need that mental space, and you're always switched on, and you're always working. And I reckon actually as an employer, you get a lot of value out of people who are part-time or 3/4 time people, because you know, they work hard and they get to work and they want to get their work done. Yeah.
I think also with running a practice, a small practice, there's so much work involved that is non-architectural, business side of things. You know, you need to structure, work out first of all the way you want to work and what commitments you want to make, and then you can structure your work life around that and your private life around that. mean, I've got a good balance, but it's taken a while. You need to be able to know, at the start of each month, what project you're working on, what stage you want them to be at, because we juggle, 5 or 6 projects all at the one time at different stages of construction. So you need to schedule, know what your targets are at the end of each month, and then you sit down and you allocate time for each of those tasks, and then you do all the work within the time period that you've allocated yourself. And if you set your mind in a business sense like that, which is actually necessary, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to pay at the end of the month. And if you've got employees, you need to be able to make sure that you've got enough money in order to pay them, and also sustain your business in terms of paying all the extra stuff that you need to pay to actually run a business. And for me, it was, an acknowledgement of the fact that I only want to work a certain period of time. I have 2 kids. One goes to school around the corner, so I drop her off and pick her up because I'm just around the corner. So I can manage that engagement with my family quite carefully and know that I've got a finish time. And the new guy that we have working in the office is fantastic. And I think there's this perception that if you're an architect, you need to work really long hours, and it's such a strain, and if you're not sitting up till 11 o'clock, you're not doing it properly, you're not putting the dedication in. I just think that's rubbish, really. You mentioned it. You need to have time away in order that you can think clearly and strategically and logically and poetically and all these things. And so in summer, because we live close to the beach, I go for a swim in the middle of the day, and it's beautiful. It takes me 5 minutes to go to the beach. I do a big long lap, and then maybe a little run, something like that, and then I go home and have something to eat, and I'm back at the desk within an hour.
That's not normal. That's totally not normal as a life, isn't it? Life's nothing like that.
It's very idealistic, but I've managed to be able to get it to work, and it gives you that kind of clarity and purpose, knowing that at the end of the month you are secure from a financial perspective, and that's a huge weight that just comes off you. And we also work really efficiently as well, so that you waste time, which is good.
Okay, I think you've heard from 2 people about 2 quite different ways of operating, but still creating wonderful architecture. And I think the lesson is you have to set your own parameters. You have to decide what it is you want to do, what direction you want to head in, what the other parameters are, who you're going to employ, how many of them you're going to employ, how you're going to afford to do that, and then how you wrap your personal and family life around all of that. And you have to think about it, and you have to be careful and make decisions. And sometimes that's decisions just for you, and other times it's decisions that involve a whole bunch of other people.
Or you get divorced.
Yes, well, that's a whole other story. But I think we're coming to a point in the evening where it's time to wrap up. We are extremely pleased and excited that so many of you turned up today. And I hope that you tell other people so that you can come along next time. We're going to keep this going. We're going to be back again in Adelaide. Thank you all for coming. There's time for another drink. There's time to talk to the speakers privately without having to let everyone else hear what you want to say. Please come and talk to them. Thank you for coming, and see you again next time. Before I finish, can I just get your name? Yes. Kirsty, would you like to come and get the champagne, please? I think that was a very appropriate question. Thank you. Okay. Just the photography of my phone. There you go. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a drink.